making inspiration from the Cincinnati Art Museum. My name is Alex and I work in the Rosenthal Education Center. So we find ourselves in my kitchen today because we are going to use some things that you can find in your kitchen to make tie-dye t-shirts. Now, we've probably all made tie-dye t-shirts using a kit that you can buy at the store, but you can also make tie-dye t-shirts using different fruits and vegetables and things you can find in your kitchen. And today we are going to be making our dye for tie-dye using a red cabbage, some beets, some red or yellow onion skins, some spinach, and I also use some curry powder, which has the spice turmeric in it, which makes a great dye. So for this project, you're going to need a few other things, but you probably have them at home. You're going to need some rubber bands, you're going to need a measuring cup, you're going to need some white vinegar, you're going to need a few different jars or bowls, different vessels. You're going to need some pots. And then, of course, you're going to need your t-shirts or your onesies or your socks or whatever it is that you plan on dyeing. I just picked out some old kind of dingy white t-shirts I had, as well as a few of my husband's old white shirts, and we're going to give them some new life with some dye. So on to step 2. So once we've gathered up all of our supplies, our next step is actually tying up our t-shirts in such a way that it'll make a cool design when you finish dyeing your shirts. So there are lots of ways you can do this. I definitely recommend going online and looking up some inspiration for different tie-dye tying techniques. But I'm going to do a really simple one which makes a cool pattern, and that is just the scrunch technique. So I'm going to take my t-shirt and I'm laying it out flat, and now I'm just pushing all the corners in and scrunching it up, getting as many wrinkles as possible and scrunching it into kind of as small of a shape as I can. And now I'm going to take my rubber bands and I'm going to use my rubber bands to bind it all up on all sides. So I'll take my rubber band here, and you're gonna just add lots of rubber bands until it looks something like this. You can see it's pretty condensed. It's got lots of rubber bands, and hopefully this will make a really cool pattern. All right, step 3. So for our next step, we are going to fix our t-shirts. And what that means is that we are going to simmer them in a solution of vinegar and water, and that will help them absorb all of the dye that we'll eventually put them in, so it doesn't just come out in the wash. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all of our bound up items. So I've got t-shirts. I am experimenting with a few different tie-dye techniques. So I've put everything in a big pot, and then we're going to do a ratio of 4 parts of water to 1 part of vinegar. So I have a lot of things that I'm planning on dyeing here. So what I did was I used 3 cups of vinegar. So then 3 times 4 is 12. So I used 12 cups of water. I put all of that in this pot, and then I'm going to put this on the stove, and I'm going to heat it up to a boil. When it's at a boil, you want to turn it down to a simmer. And then you're going to want to simmer your shirts in this vinegar solution for about an hour, and that's really going to help the dyeing process. Okay, so while our t-shirts are simmering away, we can prepare our dye. So I've decided to make kind of a bluey purple dye out of some red cabbage. I've also decided to make a pink dye out of some red onion skins and some beets that I happen to have in the refrigerator. And then I also decided to try to make kind of a springy yellow-green dye using some curry powder, or you can use turmeric, and some spinach leaves. So when you're preparing your dye, you are going to use 1 part of whatever your veggie is, and then 2 parts water. So in this case, so for my my red cabbage. If I have about 2 cups of red cabbage, and you're going to want to cut these things down into smaller chunks if you use the beets or the cabbage, or peel the outer layer of the onions off and cut those up. So if I use about 2 cups of red cabbage, that means I'm going to put 4 cups of water in. And so then you're going to put those in your pots on the stove like I have over here, and you are going to also bring those to a boil, and then you're going to simmer those for about an hour. And the longer that you simmer them, the deeper the color is going to be. Now, if you don't want to use the stove for this, there's actually another option. What you can do is put everything into a bowl and leave it overnight. And that way you don't need to use the stove to create your dye. So we're gonna let everything simmer for an hour, and then we'll be back. Okay, so it's been a little over an hour. I let everything simmer on the stove, and then I turned off the stove, and I've let things cool down. And now we are going to strain our dye. So you can see I've got my beautiful kind of pinkish red, red onion and beet dye here, but we don't want the skins and all of that in our dye. So we're going to use a mesh strainer over our jar, which is what I'm going to use to actually dye the shirts. So now, let's see if this is a bad idea. You might want to do this over the sink, but it's going okay. Okay. All right. Okay, awesome. So I've got my dye. I'm gonna go ahead, take this, put it in my compost bin. That little spill. And now you have your dye. Awesome. Okay, we're back. So now I have my 3 dyes. This is, it's kind of hard to see, but this is just a beautiful red onion and beet dye. This is a really lovely kind of bluish purple red cabbage dye. And this is kind of a yucky, murky, greenish, yellowish curry powder and spinach dye, but it smells great. So we're gonna try dyeing with all 3 of these here. I also have my bucket or my container of shirts. So as you remember, we simmered these and then I let them cool, and then I rinsed them under cold water and wrung them out. So they're damp, but they're not sopping wet. So now we're gonna start the dyeing process. So let's see here. Actually, this t-shirt, put that right in the dye. I almost have too much dye in there. Whew. Okay, I'm back. Well, what I discovered making the video was that I had too much dye in my jar, and as I started to put the t-shirt in, the dye started spilling out. So what I ended up doing was I ended up taking out about 1/3 of the pink and 1/3 of the purple and mixing them together in a new jar to make kind of a fuchsia. So I've put all my clothing items in here, and now this is the part where we wait. So you can wait about an hour and take them out, but the colors will be pretty light because it's a natural dye. So I think I'm just gonna leave them in here overnight and see what happens. So I'll check back in a minute with you and show you how the t-shirts turned out tomorrow.
Hey, good morning. It's the next morning and I have my t-shirts ready to unwrap. So I have done one already and it looks super cool, so I'm excited to open up this one with you. So what you're going to want to do after you've let your fabric soak overnight is you'll take your jar and go over to the sink. I already did this part because it was a little messy, and you'll take it out of the jar in the sink, and then you'll wring it out, and then you'll rinse it with some cold water until the water runs clear, and then you're going to squeeze it and try to get out all the excess water. So that's what I've done here. If you remember, this is our crinkled wrap shirt. So I'm just gonna take off these rubber bands and we can look at it. Let's see here. I think this is the most fun part of tie-dye, is getting to reveal your finished pattern. Oh, interesting. All right, take a look at that. That looks pretty cool. I like that. Awesome. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and take care of the others, and then I'm gonna hang them up to dry outside and then throw them in the dryer for a little bit, and then I will show you the finished products.
So here's the t-shirt dyed with red cabbage. And here's the t-shirt dyed with onion skin and beets. And here's t-shirt dyed with turmeric and spinach. It didn't really work out, so I decided to re-dye it.
Thanks for joining me today for Cam Do. If you'd like to pair your art making with a children's book, I recommend Elmer and the Rainbow by David McKee. Thanks for joining me. Hope to see you next week. Bye.